Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in today. My name is Jonah, and I'm with Discover here. And today we have Matthew James Duffy. Before we get started, though, I do want to make a quick check. Hop in the chat. Let us know if you can hear us, if you can see us well. Matthew, can you give just a little wave, make a little wave and hello?
Yeah,
make sure.
hey, how's everyone doing? Can you hear me all right?
All right, I can hear you good. Please feel free to shout out where you're coming from, what you're excited to learn today, maybe how you heard about either Discover or Matthew. Really excited for this event. Matthew's going to be teaching us about simplifying sourdough. I used to be a baker, so this is very close to my heart, and I know will revamp a lot of my lost memory. Set a couple expectations for today. If Matthew is moving quick or you have to get up for a second, don't freak out. We will have a replay available both on YouTube, on the Discover page for this event, and if you RSVP'd to the event, it'll be emailed to you as well as the course offer. And last thing to say, we will have a formal Q&A at the end of the event. So if you have questions during the presentation, feel free to drop them in the chat. We'll try and get to them during the presentation if they're pertinent to what he's doing in the moment. But if not, we'll try and get to them in the Q&A. To give a proper introduction, we have Matthew James Duffy today. He is teaching us simplifying sourdough. We're going to learn to understand what you need to do to bake beautiful sourdough bread at home. Matthew graduated from the University of Guelph. Is that how you say it? Sorry.
It's Guelph.
Guelph. Oh, sorry. With a bachelor's degree in hotel and food administration. Over the past 15 years, he has worked in some of the world's finest restaurants and hotels. He is currently a baking professor and the Baking and Pastry Arts Management Program coordinator at a leading Canadian college, all while running a successful micro bakery. Now, Matthew, I don't want to take up all the time here. Hand it over to you.
Sure. So first of all, I'm just looking at the comments and I see hello from Scotland, Halifax, Victoria, Brantford, Minneapolis, Philippines, Oakville, Toronto. And I think this is just so amazing that so many people can join this, and the passion for learning a new skill, specifically bread, is just very cool to me. I do a lot of reading and courses myself. I'm taking an online course about productivity right now, and it's just such a great thing to just see this community. We even have one of the assignments in the course is actually to post on Padlet your starter and where you're from. And when I look at it and I see all these bakers around the world that are like learning, it's just so cool to me. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Teachable, of course, but thank you everyone who's come to see this webinar. Any of the students who have taken the course, anyone who's planning on taking the course, or even if you're not and you just follow me and support me, that is so amazing for me. I have some really cool things happening later this year and early next year, and I'm really excited to share more with you. But for now, we're going to talk about sourdough.
Oh no, we lost Matthew there for just a second. We're going to see if we can get him back online. Once again, like Matthew was saying, thank you everybody for tuning in. We got everyone from Scarborough, Canada, all the way to the Philippines. Thank you, folks. We're having some technical issues today. Internet is not our friend. Kill a little time here. I used to bake professionally, mainly as a pastry chef. But I'm curious if you all want to hop in the comments, let me know, like, how did you come about baking? How did it come into your life? Was it baking with your family? Maybe you do it professionally. Was Matthew the first person who got you into baking? Would love to hear about that. Oh, and look at this. Yeah, we got everyone from the Philippines coming in. This is so awesome. From Seattle, Washington. Hey, Karen, that's my home city. So good to see you here. Never baked bread in your life, but you love sourdough. I love that. That's B. Bailey tuning in here. Thank you so much. So sorry, folks. We are waiting for Matthew to come back on here. He should be in here shortly. It's been quite a day with internet connection trying to get everything going. I don't know if that is worldwide or just with us here. But hop in the chat. I'm curious. I know I got into baking sourdough originally. I was working, like I said, as a pastry chef, and I took the job maybe saying I could do a little more than I could. And after my first round doing pastries, they moved me to bread because it was they said a little simpler, which was a bit of a misnomer. Because if you've made sourdoughs and stuff like that, it can be simple if you have all the steps laid out and everything is clear for you. But otherwise, it can be quite a challenge, especially with starters in hot changing environments or in cold. I want to call out some of these because these are great. Professional baker in the Midwest with 4 years experience, started in a pizzeria. That is such a great place to start. I know pizza dough is very different, but I think once you work with pizza dough, at least for me, it's very easy to get into other doughs here. Oh, we got Matthew coming back here in just a second. Here we go. Hey, Matthew.
I'm sorry. I just connected from my phone. I have no idea what's happened. My computer's plugged in and everything, and it just shut off. I can't get it back on, but it's definitely not a battery issue. So I really have no idea what's going on here. I'm so sorry. I just connected from my phone. Like, oh my god, this has never happened to me before. This is a embarrassing technical moment. I'm gonna try and just get the computer back on because I have a little bit of a thing, and if not, we'll just go with it from the phone.
Oh, Matthew, I am sorry. And two, we might be having a StreamYard error because it just kicked me out for a second there too.
Not too sure. So my computer has just shut off, and it is now off, and I can't get it back on.
That's okay. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I can hear you all right, and we'll roll with what we got and roll with the punches. I know we got a bunch of people who are just very cool and excited and vibing with us, so we'll make it work. I feel like it's a little appropriate with bread baking to have some challenges to overcome.
As long as my sound's all right and everything, my computer is. So it looks like it's doing some kind of an update, and it doesn't even have a quarter of the life yet. So I have no idea what's going on there. But anyways, I'm going to continue on from the phone as if it didn't happen. I don't suppose you still have access to that PDF, do you?
If you, I do not at the moment. If there's a way for you to share the link with me, I can absolutely do that. But we have a very forgiving audience here, and everyone is vibing, so I'm sure we can
send it to
make
you,
it
but
right.
I have to just really quickly.
Yeah, that's all good. I'm going to call out some of the people here because we got a really lively audience here. Karen says, I've had some sourdough experience, but would like to learn about doing it in a more simple way. I got started many years ago with the old Sourdough Jack cookbook. That's so cool. I haven't heard of the Sourdough Jack cookbook, or I haven't ever had it, but I was recommended that early on in my baking career. Linda, father was a baker in the Merchant Marines and taught me to bake, and sourdough was his favorite. We moved from Austin, Texas to Colorado. My starter, wow, 100-year-old starter. I love that aspect of sourdough, that there's like this history and flavor to what you're eating. A packer thought it was spoiled, and oh no, I should have read all of that before I started gushing there. What does Marianne say? Started my starter during lockdown. I'm a beginner, but I have baked for 40 plus. But I have baked about 40 plus sourdough loaves. That's a fair amount. I don't even know when I was working professionally if I got to that many sourdough. I mostly shied away because I never quite got it right.
All right.
All right.
Sorry about that. I'm not too sure what's going on, but I just sent you the whatever my computer's doing. It says it's got 28 minutes remaining, so we're just going to roll with it from the phone, and then I'll just do my best. So I just sent you a PDF. If you get it, let me know, but I'm going to start anyway. So we're going to be talking about sourdough today and sourdough bread. Now my dog.
I got you here, Matthew. I got the PDF up here, so I will do my best to just follow along with you as you speak.
Oh, all right. So I was going to just give a brief overview of myself here. So as Jonah mentioned, I went to the University of Guelph, and then I trained at the Stratford Chef School. Now, some of these, what you're going to see here are PDFs that are directly from my course, and we're going to skim through it really quickly, and I'll talk on some points. And then I've got a few visual demos and a couple things we're going to do. We'll take a look at some bread, we'll fold some dough, and we're actually going to put a loaf in the oven. So as I was in Stratford Chef School, I sort of started to develop this passion for bread baking. The chef at the school was really into it, so I started to sort of do it. And it wasn't really something I ever thought I would do a lot. It was just sort of something I was doing on the side of cooking. And I thought, well, I'm a chef, I'm not a baker, I don't really need to learn this, but it slowly sort of hooked me. And then I could just not turn back. You know, the more I did it, the more obsessive it became. I know some people are, you know, you can probably relate with something in your life, and whether it's sourdough or not, you know, some people start working out and they become addicted and they can't stop and they're going all the time. But it's just truly something that I really love doing. And so I've been doing it for over 15 years. I've been able to work Japan, Italy, Spain, Denmark, New York City, Vancouver Island. I've traveled to France, Germany, and a few other countries to learn more about bread baking. I've done some internships with some really great bakers. And I myself am a forever student. So I'm always taking courses. I'm always looking for places I can go to learn. I've been able to visit a bunch of the best schools that there are for bread baking. And this kind of has brought me here. So essentially with my course, what I wanted to do was to put something out there for everyone. And John, if you want to just skip down to the next section, I want something out there because I just get so many questions about, you keep going a little bit, about bread, how to do this, how come my bread doesn't look like yours, I tried this recipe, what does a fold mean, how do I make a starter, and it really, you know, I was already sharing all that information on Instagram, but I really wanted to create an A to B to get there as fast as possible in the course, so that, you know, you can find all this information out there, but I wanted to condense it. The other side of it was I found that there was a lot of maybe what I would say is kind of misinformation or confusing messages, and one baker says this and one says that, and I found a lot of it, well, you know, a lot of home bakers are sort of like learning and making things work, and it works really great. And then professionals are doing the same thing. And so I tried to take both of those and put them together. The professional style of making bread, but simplify it for the home baker. So you can learn how to make really good quality. And I actually think truly better than what your local bakery can make, provided, you know, you practice, you take some repetition, and you get it. But I'm sure any of you that have baked bread in your house would agree that like what you've baked is essentially better than anything you can buy. And it all starts here. So we have a sourdough starter. Now, what this is essentially fermented flour. I start this with rye flour. I have a full guide on my website on how you can start a sourdough starter. And I've actually just filmed a video for TikTok, Instagram, that'll go through the process. And then in the digital course, I have a step-by-step. So we're going to talk a little bit about the basics. In the second module, there's a few skills that we discussed before really diving into sourdough making. And this is going to help with your consistency of baking. Something like desired dough temperature and baker's percentage. Now I have a dough sitting on the table right here. And ultimately, you know, how do I know when to cut this? How do I know when this is ready? How do I know if I'm doing this right? Ultimately, it's guided by temperature. So when we learn the basics section, we're going to talk about how to monitor your temperatures, how to track them, and how to get the temperatures that you want when you mix your dough. If you want to just skip right down to the next section, we're going to go into sort of a little bit about the starter before I go into a little bit of a demo. So I have a lot of stuff in the course about gluten, flour. We're just going to skip this for now. You can read this. You can check this out later. And I just want to go into the next section on, keep going. So here's baker's percentages. You can scroll way down. So originally this is on my screen, so I could just scroll it, but I didn't properly prepare Jonah for this job, so he doesn't really know. There we go, right there. Keep going, actually. Keep going. You know what? You want to just go on to the camera, and we'll skip this part for now, and I'll come back to this after.
Totally. Yeah.
I feel like it's more exciting to actually and to read a PDF. I'm a teacher, and I know what students hate, and they hate looking at PDFs. So I'll just skip them.
That sounds good.
We're going to go to the actual demo.
Sounds good.
So, but essentially, what it comes down to is your starter's health. So how you build it, how you maintain it is really going to be your key to making successful, consistent bread. Now, I've got here a starter that is ripe and ready for action. I could mix a dough with this right now. And what I've got here is another starter that is sort of watery. It's kind of soupy. It's got this weird like water layer on top. It smells kind of funky. And then here I've got dehydrated sourdough starter. So in the course, I really go in depth in explaining how you can manage your sourdough starter. And ultimately it comes down to how you feed your starter. As a baker that's baking often, I feed my starter once a day, maybe twice, maybe 3 times, depending on what I'm baking, when I'm baking, if I have demos. But as a home baker, you're probably looking at once a day, maybe every second or third day, or once a week. If you're running a micro bakery and you're baking out of your house like I am, then you're probably doing it every day. And I'm going to start by showing you how I feed it. It's really quite a simple process. We're going to keep the remainder, and so I usually keep one of the complaints I hear about sourdough, or questions I guess, is what to do with the waste. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to feed this, and then I'm going to actually, I don't always keep this amount around, but it's a little bit more dramatic to see a large amount, and I want to show you what it looks like. So I'm actually going to open it up for you, and then we're going to talk about saving it. So here's our little sourdough starter. You can see it's nice and volume. It's kind of like thick. It's real. Oh, there we go. My computer is back on. Right on. I have no idea what that update was, but for some reason my computer wanted to update right there.
It's all good, Matthew. We know that I'm sure we've all experienced the same thing before.
If you click me back on yard, and then I can remove the phone, because for sure the phone's gonna die the same way.
Yeah. We got you there. Oh, we got you back. Hey.
Thank you for your patience. Is everyone still here? Did everyone go home?
No, everyone's still here. We kept everybody. Yeah, everyone wants to know how to make the sourdough.
Okay, so I'm very sorry about that. I feel much more confident now that we have the camera back on. So I'm going to feed this, and we're just going to take a little bit. And now I'm not baking anything tonight. I'm actually going to make it easier on myself. I'm going to just dip my hand in a bit of water, and I'm just going to take a little bit out. So I'm not baking anything for the rest of the night. I don't want to feed this thing before bed. I have a 5-week-old and a 3-year-old. I have to feed them, and I cook a lot. So if I can feed this less, and I've got some just cold water here. So I'm using it as cold as I can get it from the tap. I talk a little bit about ingredients in the course, and water and different ingredients that you're using, and then I go in depth in flour. And what I will say about water is, for me personally, I'm using tap water. Now, there was a period of time in my baking that I used to drive to visit my parents 2 hours away, go to a natural spring, fill up large buckets of water like this, and take them for my baking. Now, I don't exactly do that anymore, and I thought, okay, if you leave your water out overnight, the chloramine and chlorine will disperse, and then you can have a better bread product. But through some reading and a little bit more research and a little bit of trial and error, I've actually noticed zero difference in my starter's health and in my bread and bread performance. So if you're wondering what the water is, it is just very cold tap water. I do have a zero filter, so I often use that, but I also just use tap water. I'm going to be doing mine now. So I put in 125 grams of water. It was 5 grams of starter. And I'm going to put in the same amount of water and flour. So 125 of each. Just give me 1 second.
So Matthew, can I ask you a real quick question? When you're just because we had a few people asking about that PDF, because I know we all saw there's a lot of information there. I know the full PDF is part of the course, correct?
Sorry, could you just ask that again?
Oh, no worries. I just wanted to confirm, because we had a couple people asking about that PDF because it looked like really valuable information. The full PDF is part of the course, correct?
Yeah, so the full PDF is part of the course, and it's about 130 pages and maybe 20,000 words or so. We were actually, when I look back on it, I was like, wow, I can't believe we were able to produce this much. So the course is fully, when you get the course, it all comes with it. It's basically the written version. So I believe in UDL, or Universal Design for Learning, and that everyone doesn't learn the same way. So maybe one person really wants the video, another one wants to read, and maybe someone else wants both, or perhaps you're commuting to work and you just want to read, or whatever reason. So I put the condensed version, and I'll skim through it after. We'll come back to that.
Cool.
I just had my dog that's kind of old and was barking at the door, so I let him out. So, so we're gonna put in 125 flour. So what I'm doing is called a equal parts hydration, or sorry, 100% hydration sourdough starter. In the course, and you'll see on my blog and also on my Instagram, a lot of talk about hydration. And what this is meaning is flour would be equal to 100% and everything else in relation. So if we have 100 grams of flour and 80 grams of water, that would be an 80% hydration dough or starter or whatever. I'm doing 100%. So I put in 118 grams of white flour, and I'm just going to add a little touch of rye to this. And now rye is going to help me get a little bit more microbial life, and it's going to add a sugar that's going to kick off my starter. So I'm going to mix this up for you, and this is it. This is all I do to feed my starter. This is now going to rest overnight in room temperature until tomorrow morning.
So Matthew, we got a relevant question here. Tim Shields is asking, is this starter ratio always the same?
That's a great question. So typically what I do, it changes. And now, great question. So what I do is typically equal parts with usually 2 or 3% more water. So while I do 100% hydration, sometimes I might add more water. For example, if I'm going to be mixing a dough at work and I have a large container to mix. So for example, let's say that I need to mix this thing and full of starter. Now I'll go 5% more water only because it's easier to mix and it's easier to get in there with a spatula and mix it up. For something like this in a container, I just do it at 100% hydration. But if I'm measuring it and there's like 1 gram extra, 2 grams less, I don't fuss over it. I'll just mix it. The other thing is I do use a stiff starter sometimes. And the reason is, so in our sourdough starter, we have 2 main types of bacteria and acids. We have lactobacillus and acetic acid. When you're feeding your starter, you'll notice it goes through different stages. So in my over-ripened starter, it smells almost like nail polish or vinegar or a combination of the two, and that is acetic acid dominant. Now, my other starter smells very sweet and almost like yogurt, and that is a lactobacillus dominant starter. So we can create different acidities and different flavors in our bread based on how we feed our starter. The other thing is I find with a stiff starter, you will actually produce more strength. I've got here another sourdough starter, and you can see that this is a stiff one, and this is actually my pasta madre, which I'll use to make panettone. Now, panettone is not something that's covered in the course, but I do have it here to show you because I really think that once you unlock a few secrets of bread, of how to train your starter, you can really start to scale out what you bake. Today, we just posted a video of how to make sourdough brioche, but it all comes from the same starters, the same philosophies, the same technique. So by laying that foundation of understanding, we can truly start to build a better house on top of it and enhance our baker's tool chest or toolbox.
So Matthew, I wanna hop in here quick because that was a very valuable lesson for me when I started. Like when I started making sourdough, a lot of people I knew, or I would run into people who are like, I don't really like sourdough. And it's hard to kind of explain, but sourdough can be the start of a whole genre, correct?
Yeah, that's great. That's a great point. So for me personally, I hear that sometimes. I hear both, actually. I hear people that say, how do I make it more sour? Or I don't like it because I don't like sour, but they have that idea. For me personally, so I trained as a chef for a long time, and it's all about a balance of flavors. We add a bit of salt, a pinch of, a splash of sherry vinegar, maybe some white wine, maybe some lemon, some tacos with lime, shrimp with lemon, Caesar salad lemon. But it's not meant to be an overpowering flavor. The acidity is meant to bring out other flavors. So salt plays a big role in flavor. So does acid, and as well as fat. So that's why you put a big slab of butter on your bread. But ultimately, I try to use the acidity to balance the flavors. I personally don't like a really acidic dominant loaf of bread and something that's so sharp. I'm sure my daughter wouldn't eat it. I just want it there as a note to enhance the flavors of the grain, of the flour, of the starter, and whatnot.
Love that.
I'm gonna just move this aside. I've got a few pieces of equipment out, so I'm gonna talk about the basics here. In the course, I really go over sort of in depth what I think about different equipment. But ultimately, the basics are, you know, if you're here and you've been making sourdough and you're following me, you probably already have this, a scale. I use both actually. I use this one as well, and I don't do a lot of yeasted baking at home, but I have a very small scale for like 0.5 of a gram that I can use for yeast, and that's in one of these drawers somewhere. Now that's essential. If you find a recipe online that tells you cups, unless you really want to make it, or it's like your friend and you're trying to support their blog or whatever, I probably wouldn't follow those recipes. It's really much more consistent to weigh your ingredients. And now I don't really make anything with cup measures. Pretty much everything we do is weighed unless I'm following a cookbook. But for bread, I think you should always weigh it. So we're gonna use a scale. Another one is a thermometer. So as soon as I mix a dough, you can see here, I've got a dough that I mixed just before the webinar. So this is a country sourdough, same as what's on the table. I will take the temperature of it, and we're gonna do that so that we can manage our fermentation. Cold temperatures ferment a bit slower, and hot temperatures ferment warmer. It's crazy hot right now in Toronto, so I wanna kind of slow it down with a little bit of cold water. In the winter, it's very cold in my house. I might use a bit of warmer water. And there's different ways to calculate your water temperature. But ultimately, that's another piece of equipment. Now, everything else beyond that is kind of extra. You will need a banetone. So these are different types of banetones. We've got a wicker basket one here. I've got a wood pulp one here. And I've got that sort of one. I guess you find these like, you know, your local bake shop. This is a coiled. This is my least favorite. But these two styles here, for me, are interchangeable. They really ultimately perform the same, and I like them both. If you don't have a banetone and you just want to get started, you can also use a bowl lined with a dry towel dusted with flour. But that's really it. So, you know, you can get carried away and get lots of fancy timers, and you can buy an expensive pH meter, and you can buy a whole bunch of containers, but all you really need to get started is some flour, perhaps a bowl, a stainless bowl, a ceramic bowl, and that's kind of it. So I'm going to push this aside, and we're going to talk a little bit about the actual bread itself, and I'll show you the basket and why we use the basket. I've got 2 loaves of bread here that were made last night. So these have been fermenting overnight in the fridge. We're gonna yep, go for it.
Oh, I just wanted to pop in before we move past the starter. There was a question which relevant to experience I've had as well. If there's hooch on your starter when you are making it in the first 6 days, or it stops bubbling or growing between feedings, also in that first period, are there couple things you can do to kind of manage your starter? Do you have to start over with it?
Great question. Great group today. Great questions. So it can depend. So the starter that I have up here that I was looking at before has that watery layer of hooch on it. I would just pour that off, take out 10 to 30 grams in a container, mix it up with some flour and water, leave that for 12 hours, and it would be fine. It might take 2-3 feeds to sort of get it going. However, in the beginning stages of creating a sourdough starter, if you're seeing that really early on, there's a couple things you can try before restarting. And if these don't work, then I just restart. Ultimately, when I see people creating a sourdough starter that doesn't work, I think actually Trevor might be in this webinar right now, and I know he was struggling, and I've been meaning to reach out to him. So if you are here, Trevor, send me a DM because I'll help get you sorted. But ultimately, we are adding every day. And so sometimes maybe you're in a hot environment, maybe your flour is really healthy, your starter kicks it off right away, and it actually rises and falls before you can even mix the next feed, because I think in my guide on my website, I say 24 hours, and a lot of guides say that. In my experience, it's more about when it's ready. So when my starter is ready, I feed it. I don't wait 24 hours. I don't wait.
Gotcha.
You know, if I notice at 18 it's ready, I'm not going to wait the extra time, because there are a lot of factors. You know, it's hot in my house. My flour's warm. I'm using a bit warmer water. You know, it's humid out. It's really active. You can try a couple things. So you can take, if there's hooch on your starter when you're making it. So what I would do personally is I would probably take the hooch off always. I would remove some of the bottom, and I would feed that in a new jar as something separate. Now, when I first start, the way I do a starter is with no discard. So I add every day, whereas the traditional method is to mix a bunch of flour, remove some, discard the rest, and keep going. So when I first create it, I try to just add small amounts, 6 grams of water, 12 grams of water, 6 flour. Try and remove some, but the biggest sort of troubleshooting thing that I found, Chi, is people maybe don't know where to access flour or don't have access to a quality flour. And if you feed your starter with a lower quality flour, chances are it'll survive. But if you're trying to start your starter from the beginning with a low quality flour, you're already fighting a losing battle. And so what I try to do is source an organic flour, as minimum additives as you can. Look out for things like ascorbic acid. That's a dough conditioner. Now it will work, but it's not always necessary. But you can definitely use it. And so I guess to answer the question, I would scoop some off and start it in a new jar with that quantity. So if the feed calls for, 6 grams of starter, just take out 6 grams of starter and mix that. If that doesn't work, you might want to consider starting over. However, I will also say that it's really much more difficult than you think to kill a starter. I think a lot of people, when they first start, I've given people a starter and 3 days later they said, oh my goodness, I killed a starter. I don't know what I did. You can't kill it in 3 days unless you've literally rinsed it out and poured it down the drain or something. If I leave this starter on my counter, it'll be fine. It'll look like that in 7 days. That's been sitting there for 7 days, and that's only there to create a Instagram, TikTok video to show people here's how you can revive your starter. So I really think that you're probably fine. Just try and get to it. Should I rock a couple of these other questions here? Put the rest of the starter of your discard. So I'm going to get the next thing set up here while I answer the question. So for discard, what I do, great question, and I kind of touched on it but didn't finish it. So I'll feed my starter. I don't normally feed large quantities, but for this, webinar for visual, I fed a little bit more than I normally would. But you can see here, I've got a pretty good amount. Now, this is ripe and ready. So I'm going to put this in the fridge right now. And what that's going to do is a couple things. Number one, it's a backup in case for some reason I forget to save my starter. Okay. You mix your dough and then you clean all the tools and then you look and, oh my goodness. So then I know I've got this in the fridge. This, as mentioned, is also a backup. This is dehydrated starter. We could rehydrate. So I have both. But essentially what I'll do is I'll put this in the fridge now at its ripe peak point. And this is going to hold for probably close to 2 weeks. And every time I have discard, I'll add it to the same jar. And then after 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 days, or however long it takes me to get there, I will make something with it. My go-to in my house is waffles. I have a waffle machine. I'm in the process of putting an einkorn waffle recipe on the blog. I just have been a little slow because of newborn.
Cheers.
We have in the course, I think in the course I put a few recipes off my blog. So we've got a sourdough discard brownie recipe. We've got a tempura recipe. I'm also doing a takoyaki recipe that I'm working on right now, which is a Japanese dumpling with sourdough discard that I just got the pan from. Really excited. And so there's a ton. You can also just go on Google and search sourdough discard, and there's a ton of recipes. You can add it to whatever you want. You can add it to your muffin recipe, brownie recipe. And so the kind of way I treat sourdough discard is while you can make bread with discard and it will work in some ways, I try to not make something that needs 100% leavening by the starter with discard, meaning I would make a cookie that has baking powder or baking soda, or I would make a bagel that has yeast and I'll dump the discard in just to not waste it. So maybe every couple of weeks I make a batch of bagels. I'm fortunate that I have people that buy all my baked goods whenever I bake them. So it's very easy for me to bake and sell. And so I don't have to worry about it, but you can start there with the discard. I think that's a really good way. And over time, you'll start to know your own recipes and what you really want. For example, my daughter, she just knows waffles, and she knows Saturday is waffles, and she says, "Daddy, why is there no waffles?" And I have so it's a common thing in my house, and so you'll just get to know it. If you need some more resources, check out my website. But honestly, there's a ton on Google. I was playing around with Labs, which is a ferment that you use for plants. I haven't quite figured it out yet, but it's something that I was trying to figure out with a guy from Colorado. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff you can do with it. If you want to minimize your discard, I suggest just doing less feeds. Meaning, you know, I just fed the starter 5 starter, 125 water, 125 flour. I could have done 1 starter and maybe 40 or 50 water, 40 or 50 flour, which is less. So that way I'm only growing a small amount. Because if you're doing large amounts, eventually, you know, the starter sort of takes over your house. It needs its own room or a bucket, or you've got a pool of it or whatever. I'm going to do a little bit of a score now, and we're going to throw this bread in the oven. So the process of sourdough, we haven't really touched on it. We have a ripe sourdough starter. It's going to rise to its peak. We're going to mix our dough. Someone just commented, crackers are great with discard. Great idea. Rye crackers, beautiful. Pizza dough can be made with discard. I would say yes, but I would say no at the same time. So yes, it can be made with discard. Can you make the style of pizza that I want to make with discard? Not really. The other thing is discard, when sourdough starter, when it's weakening, does not add as much strength to your dough. It'll be more slack. So that's something to keep in mind.
I'm gonna sorry to interrupt you, Matthew. Just I know the questions about starters, it kind of opened a can of worms in the chat. We'll try and get to as many questions in the Q&A, but for the sake of it, I think
now, and I'll hammer them out at the end. I can go through them quickly. We have a ripe starter. We're going to mix our dough. So before we jumped on this webinar, I actually mixed the dough in this machine right here, which is a spiral mixer. Now, I talked about the difference between the two in the course. They both work. Spiral is definitely better for dough. However, tend to be larger capacity. So it depends on your needs. They're also more expensive. So it depends on what you want to do. So we're going to take our ripe starter. We're going to mix our dough. It's going to go through a series of folds in what's called bulk fermentation. Now, this is the point of you've mixed the dough to the point of dividing the dough. And in that period, we're going to give a strength building fold. It's not always necessary. Some professional bakers choose to mix it all the way on the machine with 0 folds. Others prefer to do folds as they go. I used to do a lot of folds. Now I do 1, maybe 2 during the bulk ferment process. So as that goes, your dough is rising. You kind of have something like this, and it gets shaped and moved into a loaf of bread. Now I'm going to try and show you how I score them. And I'm going to put one of these in the oven really quickly. So I'm just going to lower that so you can see here. I'm going to take a look at this. So this bread is ready to go in the oven. This has been in the fridge for a long time. First thing you can see is it's got all kinds of little gas bubbles. It's all bubbling up. And I'm going to press into it, and it's going to spring back but leave a slight indent. I don't know if you can see that very well, but you can see, I'll do it on this side. The bread is going to spring back, and it's going to leave a slight indent. And now that for me is a sign that it still has that room to rise in the oven. And what we're doing is we're looking for what's called oven spring. So as your bulk fermentation process happens, you're trying to get your dough essentially from 0 to 100 in rise. But we only want to go to about 80, 85, maybe 90, depending on the type of bread. And then the last little bit happens in the oven. So we're going to score this bread, which is going to give it a place where there's a little tension, and the water is going to fall on it. It's going to open up through the score. So I'm just going to grab, I use a pan. It is preheated. Now my oven is set at 550 degrees, and it has been on for about 45 minutes with the pan in the oven. I always crank the oven to full temperature. However, depending on your oven, your next setting may be different. We're going to score the bread, put it in the oven, and then I'm going to drop the temperature to 510. However, again, that's my oven and what works at home in my oven. As you can see from my bread, I also like to bake my loaves very dark with a higher hydration and really fresh whole grains from fresh milled flour. I find the higher hydration gets a better flavor from that caramelization in the crust. It also helps dry out the crumb, but it still stays quite moist. So I'm going to just grab my Dutch oven. I have a piece of parchment that I'm going to put under here. So this is a Challenger bread pan. This pan is specifically designed for bread baking. However, you can use any old Dutch oven that you've got on the shelf. I used this one for years before I ever got one. I've used this one here. I've even baked mini breads in this one. So it doesn't really matter. I get asked all the time, what's the best vessel? And I think the best vessel is the vessel that you already have at your house so you can get started. These are very, very hot. And the beauty of this one is the design, because I like to bake batards, which is this shape of loaf, a boule being a round one, a batard being oval. I'm going to put parchment today. Parchment's definitely optional. I like to use it. Maybe I should. Can you see my hand all right?
Yeah, we can see your hand quite well there.
So I'm going to gently lower the bread into here. You can see it kind of spills out. You can press it. It gives a nice spring back. I'm going to place the blade on. I'm going to lift it, and then I'm going to open it. Now, what I don't want to do is drag the whole blade across the bread. I only want about that much of the blade touching the bread. So you can see this side here. That's all I want, because if I go like this, it's going to drag through the bread, and it's not going to create a clean, confident cut. So I'm just going to take the blade, I'm going to open it up, and I'm going to give one big score like that. And if I don't like the end of it, I'll go back over it. I'm going to place my Dutch oven lid back on, and I'm going to add steam. And in a moment, I'll talk to you about why I'm using a Dutch oven and what the benefits are. There are other ways to bake bread. This is just the easy way. Oh, I think I got the wrong lid here. Oh, no, we're good. Now I'll show you that again. I'm going to do one more. So the beauty of these Dutch ovens, no matter what brand or what type you're using, is the thermal mass. So I can just feel the radiant heat coming off the pan. The designs of these pans are going to radiate heat down, up, side, and into your loaf of bread. And that's sort of in the same way that a professional deck oven would bake your bread. It also can trap the steam because of the lid. So I'm going to flop that one out. We're going to give it a little squeeze, and we're going to just score this one kind of off-centered, you know, maybe kind of straight down the middle. Different scores, depending on how you hold the blade, are going to give you a different aesthetic. You can also put a bunch of fancy cuts in your bread if you want. Personally, I don't really like doing that, but there's nothing wrong with it, but it is not my favorite thing.
Matthew, got a quick question here from Tim Shields again. Is the spritzing or the water essential?
Let me put this in, and then I'll answer that.
Love it.
So great question. I personally have found that it is beneficial, but it is not necessary. So really what it's doing is it's giving me added steam in my oven. So bread tends to bake. So essentially what we're trying to do is recreate a professional oven. So in a professional oven, you have a hearth or a stone, and you have a steam injection. The bread lands on the hearth, you press the button, the steam injects into the oven. It lands on the surface of the loaf. Where you've cut the loaf is now a weak point, and as the bread expands, it's allowed to open and rise from, I guess it's more like that, and split the cut, and one side opens. So with a Dutch oven, if you have a bread, when you put it in, essentially anything you put in the oven, it's going to start to create steam. Because what's happening in the oven is you're losing water. When you split an onion in a pan, you're removing the water, and that's going to sweeten it. We have the same kind of theory with bread. When we put it in the oven, it gets hot, it's going to let out steam. The Dutch oven is going to trap it. So do you need to add the steam? No. Is it beneficial? Absolutely yes. So I think personally that the spritz is going to add, it's going to kickstart it. In many deck ovens, what I'll do is I'll pre-steam. So I'll press the button, load the chamber with steam, then I will fire my bread, and then I'll steam it again. And that's going to add added steam to really give the burst to the bread. If you are worried about over steaming, it's really hard in a Dutch oven. Now it is possible, but it's very difficult. What you would see is a loaf of bread that looks varnished. Over steam looks varnished or like painted or whatever, and under steam looks pale. Are you spraying the sides or hitting the dough? So all I'm trying to do is spray the top of the Dutch oven. So with something like this, let's say, I would lower my bread into the oven. I would place the lid on it, and then I would crack the lid and I would spray onto the lid of the pan, because as soon as the water hits the hot lid, it's going to disperse onto the loaf. It's going to turn into steam and sort of cover it. So I'm going off of the loaf. Now, during bulk fermentation, I was talking about doing strength building folds. I'm going to demo that to you now. I'm just going to clean these baskets off the table and put them over here. So we're going to do what's called a strength building fold. Now, this is a larger mass of dough. This is going to be about 6 loaves of bread that are 900 grams each. And I'm just going to try and pull you in so I can show you. Can you see that a little better?
Yeah, that's very clear there.
So you can see here, this dough is very relaxed. This dough looks very chill. This dough has some bubbles on top of it, and it looks flat. Can you see how it's spread flat to the sides of the tub? It doesn't have any concave edges, or it's not rounded. So what we're going to do is we're going to try and build strength. If you're worried your dough is going to stick, this bin has been lightly oiled and sprayed with water, creating an emulsification, like a split emulsification that's going to keep your dough. So if you're worried about it slipping, you can take a wet dough scraper and just go down the sides. Now, I don't think you really need to do this if the dough is properly made, but just in case, we're going to do it. And then what we're going to do is we're going to wet our hands. So we always want to use wet hands for wet dough. You can see like they're so wet that I can actually flick water onto the dough. And I'm going to take the side away from me, and I'm going to give it a good upward stretch. Maybe I'll put the camera up so you can see the stretch a little better. And I'll show you I really go pretty far on it. So again, you wet your hands, you're going to loosen it and just give it a good. Okay. Now you can also bring the sides in and over. But what I prefer to do is now take the side closest to me, throw it away from me, and then I kind of use my body to hold it in. And you can see now, look at how tight that dough looks. And you can really see a huge difference. I'm going to put it into the corner of the tub just for purposes of you seeing it. And so you can really see a huge difference in my dough. Now you can see there's a little tear there. That's because I picked it up twice. But really what we're doing is we're building strength, but it's also going to help us regulate the temperature. So if my dough is very warm, perhaps on the inside of the dough, it's very warm and the outside's cold because my house is cold, or maybe the opposite. The outside's hot, or maybe I mix my dough a little bit too warm and I placed it in the fridge for half an hour to sort of cool it down. When I fold it, that's going to regulate your temperature again, and it's going to give you that strength that you need for your dough. So there's our little strength building fold. I always keep a note of it because I'm very forgetful. So I'm actually going to cross out first fold. So on my book, I've wrote country sourdough, 4 p.m., 26.5 degrees Celsius, meaning the temperature of the dough after I've mixed it. And, you know, if I don't keep notes, I'll forget. The other thing is I like to look back on my notes to see where I was baking, how long my bulks were, what did I add, what percentages of this did I have, and I just keep little notes. I mean, this book is like, looks like a bunch of scratch, but it's all just my personal way my brain's working. And sort of eventually when you start doing this and you kind of get through the process, you really learn how to just create your own formulas. So I'm kind of at the point now where I just look at the percentages, not so much the recipe, and then I go from there. So I would say, hey, I've got this flour I want to try. Let's do 25% of it, or let's do 50% or whatever. This particular dough is 30% whole wheat, which I milled this morning. And that's something else I wanted to show you really quickly. So is there any questions on that I should get caught up on, or should I just move on to the next part?
I think you're good. For time's sake, let's keep going, and we'll try and get back to those questions in the
All
Q&A.
right. So the next thing I want to show you here is milling. So in the course, we talk a little bit about milling. There's also a guide on my website. You can check it out. It's pretty straightforward. And this is for bakers that want to. There's a couple benefits. With a temperature inform how many folds you make. Great question, Tim. Typically, the answer is no. But I guess it could, in theory, yes. You might, if you really are off, you might want to give one more. But I more focus the folds on strength. So in the course, we talk a lot about milling flour. Now, there's a couple benefits to it. It's definitely not for everybody. It's definitely an extra tool that costs money. It's an extra thing to have in your house. It's an extra thing to worry about, whatever. But for me, it really personalizes my bread, and it allows me the ability to work with smaller farms and grains that I want. Now, flour is like anything. once you crack it open, its life starts to go down. So think about coffee. How many of you, give me a thumbs up or give me a yes if you grind your own coffee at home for your coffee? Let me see in the chat. Yes, I grind my own coffee.
For sure.
How many of you are grinding coffee at home? I bet you there's a lot of you that are grinding coffee. I don't see anyone answering yes, but I bet you a lot of you grind your own coffee. And I bet you 15 years ago, you probably did not grind your own coffee. And it wasn't something that you really thought about. Or if you're, my age, I'm in my late 30s. My parents never ground coffee. They didn't even think of that. They just bought it ground at the store. However, as soon as you grind it, the oils are released. The quality is going to start to go down. It doesn't mean that it's bad a week later or 2 weeks later or even a month later. It doesn't mean that it's not good. It's just maybe a little bit different, and it's going to taste a little different. So we're going to talk a little bit about flour milling. Now, I've got some grains that I put in the freezer. This is all covered in the course, by the way, if you want to learn more about milling. So these are hard red spring wheat berries. Now, maybe you want to try spelt or einkorn or red fife. There's a couple things to think about when we're milling. The first is the grain itself. There's hard grains and soft grains. Hard red spring, which this is, or whole wheat, is a hard grain. Spelt is a soft grain, so you may notice larger specks of bran in your spelt flour. Now, that's because it doesn't pulverize the same. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to eat it, and I'm going to judge how hard it is. Now, this is a very hard grain, so I know that I want to mill this very fine. I also know that this grain is going to absorb a lot of water. Softer grains will not have the ability to absorb as much water. So I'm going to put my mill on its coarsest setting. I'm going to turn it on, and I'm going to throw this through. Not sure if I said this, but I froze the grains before I milled them. Now, take a look here. It's maybe hard to see. So it's pretty coarse, right? Can you see how coarse cracked that is? It definitely doesn't look like flour. It's very hard. It's still cold. If you wanted to, you can use cracked grains for porridge in your bread. So meaning cooking porridge, and that gets back into your dough. I just posted a recipe maybe 2 days ago on how to make porridge bread on my Instagram. But I'm going to mill this again. Now, as I said, this is a very hard grain. So now I'm going to move this to its finest setting. So you can see here, now this is fine flour. So there's a big difference. If I scrunch it, it kind of groups up in my hand. It's still a little bit coarse compared to what I'm used to because I actually have been milling on a larger mill. But that's a nice way to add a little bit of diversity in your baking. Now, not only your sourdough, but any baking in general. There are a better shelf life. The grains store much better. So having a tub of grains is better than having a tub of flour. I've been grinding it my whole life, but I'm just young. All right. So are there small mills for small kitchens? Natalia, great question. So the only one that I know of is the Como and Wolfgang Mock Mill. Now there are some other ones, and there's like a crank one. There's an attachment for your KitchenAid. This one is pretty good, and I think Wolfgang Mock Mill is probably the same. I would probably say they're about the same. I don't know if it gets any smaller than that, but maybe that's something that I need to work on so that I can have a little home version for the condo dweller, you know?
Well, and Matthew, just to be clear, because I got confused, it's just the wooden mill in front, not the big metal thing behind it, right?
Sorry. So that's a great thing. So take a look. This is the mill here.
Yeah.
Just that. This is a spiral mixer. So this is a large spiral mixer. I can show you. Let's take a look. So with mixing our doughs, in the course, I focus on hand mixing because it's more versatile. The other thing is if you learn hand mixing, you can always go back and learn machine mixing. But if you learn machine mixing, it's much harder to learn hand mixing. The other thing is when you're think of riding a bicycle up a hill, you're going up a really steep hill that drops off the other side. If you're flying up and you're going as fast as you can, you're going to overshoot that and come down. If you're going up really slow, when you get to the top, you can stop. So when you're hand mixing and you realize it's mixed, you stop. But when you're in the machine, it's very quick to overmix and oxidize your dough. Now, I'm a little bit obsessive, so when I mix a dough, I kind of stand over it and I stare at it. When I make panettone, the mixing process for the second dough takes about 50 minutes. So I literally stand here for about 50 minutes and I kind of pace back around like this, all stressed out. I'm like, I hope it's working. Is the dough okay? I touch it. It's a very intense mixing process. So I like to treat it with hand mixing. However, I do explain this in the course, but I'll show you right now. So this is a spiral mixer. You can see the bowl turns. And at the back, it's got a hook, and there's a divider bar here. Nice. Now, what that does, the divider bar is going to break the dough so that it continue to turn around. Whereas if anyone's ever mixed in one of these mixers, like this, sorry, it's dirty. I just fed my pasta madre in here before. It tends to spiral up the hook because there's no dough breaker. A planetary mixer will require more mixing than a spiral mixer. For example, if I told you mix this dough for 10 minutes on a spiral mixer and you only have a planetary, you're probably going to need 12 to 14 minutes. The friction factor, which is discussed in the course, so friction factor is the amount of heat given to the dough during the mixing process. That's also going to be different from not only spiral to planetary, but planetary to planetary or spiral to spiral. So my spiral might be different than your spiral. The other thing is if I mix a very large quantity of dough, it's going to give a different friction factor than a small quantity. Or if I mix a very low hydration dough, it's going to really give friction factor. If I mix bagels in here, I have to start with very cold water because it adds a lot of heat. Now, the other thing is there's this little breaker bar here. Now, mine is square. Some mixers have a circle one. A circle one works, but it does not break the dough the same. So it requires a little bit more mixing, but it doesn't add the friction to the dough. So there's a lot to like kind of factor.
All these variables, yeah.
But once you get a mixer, it's like anything. You'll figure it out. You know, every bicycle rides a little differently, but you don't, well, maybe you do. Maybe you do, but I'm going to say you don't ride your bicycle and look at the neighbors and say like, well, I wish I had that bicycle. Like you just figure out how to use yours. And now maybe you do wish you had the neighbor's bicycle. And of course, you know, my neighbor has a great bicycle, but you know, whatever. Right. I don't have a good bicycle. It's like one of those things. It's really easy to sort of upgrade at any point. So I've got 5 minutes left on the Dutch oven removal. So in 5 minutes, we're going to take the lid off the Dutch oven. I should actually fully explain this process. Sorry. The computer dying threw me off of my. So what we're doing is we are mixing a dough. We're bulk fermenting it. We're folding it during those bulk ferments. We're going to divide and shape it. We're going to ferment it overnight, and then it's going to go in the oven. And now that oven, we've added steam. However, we don't want steam for the entire bake. So in a commercial deck oven, you have what's called a damper or it's like a little switch, and it essentially is a vent at the back of the oven. It opens and all the moisture sucks out. The reason for this is we want to get a thin, crisp crust on our bread, right? You can hear that? We want that nice, thin, crispy crust like that French baguette. So we remove the steam so we can finish in a dry oven and finish our bread. So in about 4 minutes, I'm going to remove the lid from the Dutch oven. I think we should do some questions now. I don't have anything else to demo. I'd be happy to cut a loaf of bread if someone wants to see, or if you want me to cut the panettone open, I'll cut it open, whatever.
Well, maybe it's a good time, if nothing else, for everyone watching to start dropping any questions you still have. I know we have some that I wanted to try and hit from before, but if not, feel free to start dropping some questions into the comments, everybody. We're going to try and get to every question that was asked.
Let me know. I'll cut these too if anyone wants to sort of take them.
Yeah. I mean, who doesn't like looking at a fresh cut piece of bread?
Sure, let's do it. We're going to cut. So this is panettone. So I made this 2 days ago. Panettone is an Italian bread. It is 100% naturally leavened. It is a very, very complicated, difficult bread to make, and it requires a lot of patience. It's like having a baby. You have to feed the starter every 3 to 3.5 hours. The reason I brought it was to show the possibilities of what you can do with sourdough. Now, this takes a long time to sort of learn, and I will be launching a digital course hopefully early December, and if not in January, on how to make panettone, and it's going to be on Teachable, so make sure you check that out. I'm going to be calling it Simplifying Panettone, and I'm going to sort of take the things that I've studied over the past 5 years about the bread and kind of condense them so that you can get started at home. With that said, simplifying sourdough, if you take the course, I guarantee you'll be making bread. With panettone, you still got to do the work because it's really hard. So we'll cut it open to start. We're going to take a look at what it is. So we talked a little bit about acidity in doughs. Now this is a low acid bread. So we're trying purposely to keep the acidity low in the dough.
Oh man, that's beautiful.
So we're trying purposely to keep the acidity low in our dough because we want it to taste sweet. It's a sweet Christmas holiday bread. So there's the inside of that. This one has sour cherry. I'm just going to grab my dog. He is scratching at the door, if you don't mind.
Totally. Well, I just to make a note to our viewers, we'll do a proper introduction to the course itself. And Matthew has mentioned it a few times, but there is a link for his course in the comments and in the description for the video. It'll also be emailed to you, along with the replay of the video. And just to make note of it, for this week, Matthew is doing $62 off for the week for this course, which is really good value for me. It seems like starter dough is really just a beginning for making a lot of different styles of bread.
Well, so that's a really good point. And so one of the things that I really wanted to focus on in the course is simplifying sourdough, but it goes across everything. What we talk about, maybe if I'll do this really quickly. Can I just skip through really quickly my PDF?
Yeah. Did you want to share it on your end, or did you want me?
Yeah, I'll share it and then I'll flip it. Can you see it now, or let me know when you can see it?
I can see it. If you switch to the right place, I'll bring it up there. Here we go. Yeah.
So what I tried to do was focus on simplifying the technique, but really, it's really not simple. There's 20,000 words or something and 120 PDF pages. However, I'm just breaking it down step by step and giving you the information that I feel is relevant so that you can make the bread. But it goes across everything. So when you learn how to make this type of sourdough bread, you will unlock the door to making, let's say, porridge bread or cheddar jalapeno bread, or all kinds of different things, panettone. And I tried to give the fundamental skills so that you can understand it. My next course that I'm launching in September is called Simplifying Sourdough Pizza. And we're going to talk about how to make sourdough pizza. And now the same concept. I want anyone to be able to start, whether you've got 0 experience or 3 years experience, and still find lots of value in the course. Oh, there's my timer. So I'm just going to bring you into the kitchen because it's easier.
Love it.
I feel like someone asked a question about the oven, and I get asked this all the time. I do not have a special oven. I actually have like a really broken oven that doesn't work very well. It's nothing special. It is a gas burner, but it is like one of the cheapest ones that you can buy.
I actually have the question right here. If you have a home oven with steam, is it better to bake it in the Dutch oven or just the oven with the steam option? Also, which percentage of steam would you recommend?
So that's a great question, but I think honestly, it really would depend on the oven. Personally, what I would do is I would try the steam feature, and I would definitely try it. I would start with probably 5 seconds, but deck oven, it depends on the PSI or the pressure that's going into your oven. So if you're, in my commercial deck oven at the college, for a while, it was coming in at 90 PSI, but I had it reduced to 35. So at 90, I would steam for 1 or 2 seconds, but I want a lower, longer steam. So what I would do is start with 5, take a look at your bread and see. You're going to need a baking steel or a stone. Baking steel is a great product for that thermal mass. Great question here too. Do we need this course before the pizza course? No, you do not. The whole point is that they could both be taken solo. Mind you, it'll help you, but it's definitely not required.
So did you want to keep answering some of these questions, or take a minute to look at the bread?
We're just going to take a look here.
Love it. Oh, look at that.
There's one. So because I was talking, this maybe has gone a little bit further than ideal, but it's not the end of the world. So I sort of like to take the lid off when it just starts to color, but you can see it's actually getting a bit of dark golden. So I'm a few minutes late to the lid, but that's okay.
So you would pull that like before the golden phase?
Probably, yeah, probably 3 minutes ago when it's just started to color. To kind of cheat it, I'm going to just open the oven. I can feel the steam coming out, and that's going to kind of suck some of the steam out. And now I'm going to set the timer. So if I don't, I'll burn the bread. So let me go back to, so now that you've seen the bread baking, I'll cut a loaf. Then I'm going to skim our PDF and do a little bit of introduction. And then I'll let you take it over from there.
Sounds good.
Now, this is probably going to end up being for dinner tonight. My daughter absolutely loves it. And this is a pretty nice loaf of bread, I would say. So I've got a little bit of a big hole there. That's not my favorite thing to see that. But you can see it's got a nice sort of even. There's no really dense or tight spots. It's got good fermentation. It smells absolutely wonderful. Cut one more. It's just so good and fresh. I mean, this is a pretty good fermentation on this loaf of bread. So I would say that's looking pretty good right there. For me, I like the challenge of making open crumb bread. I like the tighter ones. It's really up to you. There's a lot of so there's a great question here. I always thought the bigger holes are better. Now, for me, yes, I prefer open crumb. And now, mind you, this isn't the most open loaf of bread ever I've baked, but it's pretty open and even and nice. You know, it's maybe a little bit tight right there, but overall, it's pretty good. And so, like, for me, I can see that's nice fermentation. It looks good. My feeling is that with an open crumb, you have a better texture, and the texture is going to help you get better taste. So they work hand in hand. And really, when you step back and look at it, why are we baking this bread? We're just eating it. It's just a loaf of bread for dinner, for your neighbor, for whatever. So taste is very important. So if you're sacrificing taste for open holes, then I think, no, it's probably not worth it. But in my opinion, it is. The other is, whole grains and fresh milled flour require a lot of water to properly hydrate. You can see this is pretty moist in there, you know, like, look, I can squish it and it's going to pop right back to the way it was. Bread from the store is not going to do that. So for me, I find that I get a better flavor, it's a sign of good fermentation. I'm also going to get a better shelf life because I've properly hydrated the bread. So for me, it's definitely better. Now, is it the best? It just depends on you and your baking. I know people that say, I don't like that because the butter falls through or whatever. My opinion, yes, is better, but that's a very, very good question. So I'm just going to flip back to the course highlights here. So this is the PDFs that come with the course now. As I said before, we're trying to produce a universal design for learning. So we've got a little bit of an explanation about gluten here, the differences between gluten and gliadin. Now, when you saw me stretch that dough, you could see that it went up, 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 up. Now that's the extensibility, the dough's ability to go out. Elasticity is going in. So I kind of explained the two of those things here. It's going to go through baker's percentages, dough temperatures, friction factor, how to schedule your sourdough baking, a beginner recipe for sourdough, sourdough checklist. What do you need to do? Essential tools are all of the things that you really need to bake sourdough bread. We're going to talk about ingredients, fresh milled flour, how to mill your own flour at home, ancient grains, different varieties of wheat. Now, I'm really shooting a lot of information at you, but I hope you leave this webinar with your head spinning a little bit and inspired to go and bake some bread. Then we're going to talk about the process of sourdough. Now, I think this is the most important module for a lot of people, and this is the one I've gotten the most thank yous from. People are saying, thank you for writing this because I before did not understand it, and it tells you how to manage your starter. How do I have a starter that I can be ready to bake in 2 hours or 4 hours or 8 hours or 12 hours? And how does that even happen? How come this recipe says mix it for 4 and this one says 12? And I'm going to blast all that open and teach you how to understand that. And it's really going to unlock the bread baking hands-on time is not a lot. The scoring takes 2 seconds. The shaping takes a minute, maybe 10 if you're just starting, whatever. There's not a lot of hands-on time, but that 36 hours, or with panettone, that's 72 hours. It's a lot of time. So without proper planning and understanding, it can get a little bit difficult. I'm going to just skim down here. So you're going to see there's someone had asked about discard. So we talk about discard, how to use it, what it's for. We've got a couple recipes. Now these recipes are on my blog. You can go see them for free. You don't have to take the course to get these, but I just threw them in there as a beneficial. Then we have our guide on how to do everything. So when I was doing things today, I sort of touched on its importance. You score the bread for this. Now the course goes into way more detail on all the topics. This is only supposed to be an hour, and I'm like just jamming everything at you. Does buying this class give us any Q&A time with you, or is that not really possible? So there is an option to add a coaching session. So there's, I believe it's 30 and 60. I think there's both. And I also have a mentorship program on Teachable as well that you can sign up for. Now, the comment section, I answer the comments pretty often. I did fall behind a little bit when my daughter was born, and they kind of built up, and then I've cleared them. But the comments come to my email. So, you know, as an example, let's say you are having a problem with your bread and you have a comment and you leave it as a question. I'll probably answer it within 5 days. But if you need that answer right that very second, I'm not live to answer it for you. It's all pre-recorded materials. All the PDF is pre-recorded, but I'm definitely here to support you. We also have a Padlet where you can see everyone else's bakes. What I didn't do for this course, but I will do for sourdough pizza, is I will create either a Facebook group or a Discord channel that you can come and ask questions. The only reason I didn't do it for the bread course was because I knew we were having a baby, and I didn't want the commitment, and I didn't want people to feel like they were let down because I wasn't there to answer their questions. So I thought, you know what, I'm just gonna let it stand online. So we're going to skip right to the very end of this. And so even in the course, we talk about how to refresh your bread, how to store your bread, how to freeze your bread. Some of these things you can find on my website. Some of them are just in the course. All of the videos expand on everything that's in the website. You know, if you're unsure, take a look at the site, go through the guide, make your own sourdough starter, and start there. You know, there's a lot of ways to do it. Do you want to go through some questions? Oh, you are a great teacher. I have to go, but thank you. Thank you so much, B. Bailey.
Yeah, I did, just because there's a few questions that have been asked a couple times, so I want to honor those there. But we do have to wrap up just for time's sake a little bit, so we'll try and go through these quick. Is there a difference between a starter, biga, and or poolish? Are they just different terms for the same thing?
So in my experience, biga and poolish refers to a yeasted starter or a yeasted pre-ferment. So all of these doughs are made with what's called pre-fermented flour, meaning a portion of the flour is pre-fermented before you mix it. Panettone, for example, is about 80% pre-fermented flour, whereas sourdough can be anywhere from sort of like 4 to maybe 15, maybe focaccia even up to 40, maybe a little bit more depending on the dough, whatever. Starter levain is interchangeable. That is your sourdough starter. And then a biga versus poolish. Biga is a stiff Italian traditional. It's like it's like a weird mixed dough that's not even really pulled together. Some people pull it together, some don't. And poolish is a liquid. So poolish would look like the starter that I fed tonight, but made with yeast.
Gotcha. I'm going to keep just rolling here. So how can you tell if your bread is strong enough or if it requires another fold?
Great question. So what I usually look for is this. So it's after the fact, but when you shape, you'll know if your dough is strong enough, which is where the notes come in. So you can go back on them. My typical rule is I like to leave 1 hour after mixing before the first fold and 1 hour before shaping after the last fold. A lot of the recipes online are like fold every 15 minutes, but what you're doing is you're never allowing the dough to relax. So what I do, I fold the dough, I turn it in the bin, it relaxes and elongates this way. So now you're getting gluten strands going that way. Then you do it again and they go this way. And you're creating these longer, more intricate gluten webs. And that's going to create a different crumb. So if you want to be wild open crumb, you can do a little bit less folding and more wild. If you want it more even like this, you can mix a little harder. You know, it's pretty like even, whatever. You can mix your dough a little bit harder, fold it. Now, this dough has had 2 folds, and you can see now it does not look flat. You can see how the edges are rounded. Yep. Now, I can tell this is going to need another fold. So I think, it's not the best answer. It's not the best answer ever, but I think it's those things that you learn in time. And so there's no specific right answer. But what I look for is at the end of the bulk, the dough should be rounded is one good sign that you have enough strength. And then when you're shaping. So when I pre-shape my dough, I let it rest for 30 to 40 minutes. If after that 30 to 40 minutes, it's flat, definitely 100% it is not strong enough.
Gotcha. I think we got time for one more question here. But they were saying, please help. My struggle is knowing when the dough is proofed and ready to bake. I poke it, but find it challenging to know when to bake or optimal crumb and spring.
Again, great question. So this comes with practice, experience, time. If you're baking at ambient, it is much more difficult to judge. Ambient meaning you've shaped your dough and you've left it at room temperature. If you're really struggling, I would suggest doing a cold ferment. So in a bakery, you would be fermenting between 6 and 12 degrees Celsius. And that's going to go for like 8 to 10 hours because bakeries have schedules. They want to go, maybe some bakeries colder, but in a home, your fridge is like 3, maybe 4 degrees Celsius, much colder. And it's ultimately going to really slow it down. And then, you know, the bread that's in the oven now is the same bread that's on the table. I baked the bread on the table this morning at 8 a.m. That bread has been in the fridge since 8 a.m. and they look pretty much the same. Maybe this one's a little bit more proofed, not as open, but ultimately it's not that much different. So if you're really struggling, I would do that. Now, I would say poke it with a spring back, but slight indent is a good reason, and air on the side of a little bit under. The other one is take notes. That's the best way you can learn for the next bake.
Right. I think we sadly I know I could watch this forever because I love it so much, but we sadly got to kind of wrap up. Everyone, thank you so much for watching. Matthew, thank you for giving so much of your time. Everyone, please hop in the comments. Thank Matthew for his time. Thank him for his energy. Don't forget that link for his course and that discount offer is only available for a week. So hop in there, hop on it if you want to get your starters going, if you want to get sourdough part of your life. Matthew, before we call it totally quits, I did want to ask just one more question. Like, do you have any last little words of wisdom for people getting started on their sourdough journey?
Yeah. So one of the biggest things is just if you really want to do it, just do it. You know, don't get discouraged. Don't get beat up by Instagram. You know, don't look at other people's videos and pictures. Right. Everyone learns at a different pace. I've got students that have taken this course and within 5 days we're baking bread better than mine, like beautiful. I've got professional bakers that have taken the course and same thing. I've also got people that have taken it and it's taken them 2 months of trying and they're finally getting it. But like, you know, you just can't give up. If you really want to learn it, everyone learns at a different pace. It's really easy to get discouraged and it's really easy to, you know, at the beginning of the pandemic, I was getting all these questions and someone would send me a picture and they would say, hey, here's my bread, but it doesn't really look like yours. Like I don't have that big hole. My first question was, how long have you been baking for? And often they would say something like 2 weeks, 3 weeks.
Right.
You know, I've been baking for over 15 years. It takes practice, repetition. There's really no secrets. All the information is available for you for free online. You can pay for my course. You can also find it on YouTube, whatever. Like there's hundreds of guides on the internet. So just keep learning. One of the things for me is I'm a forever learner. I have over 400 cookbooks. I have, you know, here's the books that I'm currently reading here. There's probably about a dozen there. There's another one shelved beside my bed and downstairs about 400. So I'm always learning. I'm always adjusting. If I was to look back on my course in a year, I'd probably be like, well, I would do this differently. I'm always doing changes. One great thing about baking 2 loaves of bread at a time is you can try something. Score one this way, score one that way. I'm just going to grab my bread. That's essentially it for me. If you do have any...
Well, everyone watching, just one last little note. If you've enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to the Discover channel. We'll hope to have Matthew back, and we love having people like him back. Oh, wait, can we see those loaves of bread? That is gorgeous.
Yeah. Hot.
Oh, yeah.
A little baker's trick for anyone that is looking for an open crumb loaf of bread. So if you are an Instagram warrior and you want an open crumb loaf of bread and you want that beautiful picture. So can you see how this bread is flat on the bottom?
Mm-hmm.
And now look at the bread that I baked this morning. Can you see how it sort of curves in a little bit?
Oh, yeah.
A little bit. It's not quite flat. And same thing with this loaf. When you look at it here, you can see it better. You see how it's not quite flat? It's got like a little curve in. Now, what's going to happen is as this dough cools, the inside's going to tighten. So if I want to be like really like epic open crumb, I'll wait 30 minutes and cut this in half and it's going to be this beautiful open. Whereas here, it's still pretty nice and great, but it's a little bit tighter because you can see it's starting to contract a little bit. Whereas, and if I cut it tomorrow, it's going to look even tighter. So a Instagram hack for you. A lot of the bakers are cutting them hot. Sometimes you can even see the steam in the videos.
You're like, wait, no.
Yeah, you shouldn't. It's not good for the bread. Don't do it for the quality of the bread. But if you want a picture, you cut it hot.
Right. Love it.
Well, last thing I do want to say is if you do have questions about the course, feel free to reach out to me. I'm very approachable. Send me an Instagram message or email, whatever.
And what is your handle on Instagram so everyone can follow you there?
It is at Matthew James Duffy, all one word.
Love it. Well, thank you so much for your time, Matthew. I'm excited to get baking again. This definitely kickstarted my hankering for it. Everyone who's watching, thank you so much for sticking it out. We appreciate. We're sorry for some of the technical difficulties, but we appreciate you hanging out for the longer time and getting all this value. Yeah, thank you so much, Matthew, and thank you, everyone. We'll see you next time. Have a wonderful day, man.
Thank you.